Pandemic Legion losing a match, much like Michael Bolton's mustache.
It's going to be gone.
I like that I was destroyed in every way as well. I originally made the caveat that if they brought the Vargas, but they brought the Vargas and won. So my mustache will be justly shaved.
I got it half right. I said that they'd bring the Vargers and they'd bring the Widows, but the Widows would win. And I, of course, got that one wrong.
And I don't remember if I said it or not, but what I was thinking is I thought they should bring the Vargers because if they're that comfortable with the setup, you don't want to mix it up and play something you're not comfortable with. And wow, that is a good setup. PL thought they had a hard counter to...
I think everyone thought that was a hard counter.
Yeah, and sure enough, it wasn't. What I noticed when I was watching it there that I didn't catch on the first time is it appeared all those Hawks were remote ECCMing. And that could have been like the deciding factor in why those jams weren't sticking as well as it could have.
The thing is that setup, the Widow setup is quite good, even if you don't get a fully jammed out team. That Widow setup does not rely, like many ECM teams do, on the entire team being jammed. You can have half the team unjammed and still take damage because you're only fitting 2, maybe 3 ECM modules on each Widow. And then you're just relying on that to jam out their key ships. And then the Torps will kill those, and then your support fights their support. I think the problem there was like the PL support did not take out any of the Hun support at all. They focused on the big tank ships when they know those ships have the absolute max tank possible. They have Loki bonuses, they have Tengu bonuses, and the support was coming from the Frigs and the Hawks and Merlins. Leaving those Hawks and Merlins alive was, I feel like, the crucial mistake there.
So one thing I didn't catch from Hun Reloaded setup now compared to the one they had last match is we had a load of ECCM coming from the small ships to the bigger ships, which might have been a match-specific setup. I don't remember if they had that. For anyone wondering exactly why that is important, could you quickly explain what ECCM is?
So ECCM is like the module that counters ECM. It increases your sensor strength, which is basically like a number applied to your ship, that is matched against the ECM strength. Here we go. ECCM is fit into a high as an active module or into a low as a less effective inactive module. And then it counters the sensor strength of the jamming ECM module that matches it. You can sort of counter an ECCM by signal distortion with signal distortion amps, which increases your ECM gem strength. But the important thing is that ECCM is generally a stronger module. You have to fit less of them than ECM modules to counter. And if you're not being jammed by ECM, an ECCM slot is a wasted slot. It is good for absolutely nothing other than fighting that one specific EWAR module.
And what we've been seeing a lot in other ECM setups, the Rook setups, ECM teams tend to have really low DPS. But this Widow-based setup that PL brought is more resilient in that regard. Those Torp Widows still do a whole lot of damage and still can ECM them. I really like that PL setup.
If you're in range.
If you're in range, of course. You only get maybe, 30... They're probably getting about 30 kilometers out of those Torps.
33.5, something like that.
Yeah.
All right, Michael Bolton, sharp.
I might fly a Torp Raven a lot.
All right, so we essentially have a situation where everyone watching PL's Widows setup, everyone thinking, oh, they might be countering that, but Hun thinking, all right, but we'll just switch some slots on our frigates and see if it carries us through.
That's what I think happened right there.
Yeah.
It's the support, the frigates, that made the difference in that fight.
And we spoke a little bit about the frigates because I think that was a fairly large difference. PL going for the big ships of Hun, but the first thing Hun did was kill 3 Griffins.
Yeah.
And like you think, oh, well, it's frigates, they're not really that important, but how important are frigates in an ECM
Griffins
setup?
in that setup are so important. Griffins, point for point, DPS for DPS, are the most worthwhile kills you can do in the entire tournament. EWAR frigates in general are probably the most worthwhile kills. If you can get them real quick.
2 points.
They're only 2 points, or the actual EWAR frigate, the Tech 2 version, is 5 points. But the one thing they all have in common is they have exceptionally low health and incredibly high effectiveness at mitigating the other team's damage. They can put damps on so you can't lock. They can use ECM so that you can't lock at all at any range. They can use tracking disruption, and they can use target painters. And tackle.
You're getting 4 mid slots worth of utility modules for only 2 points. It's such a good buy, and that's every time I saw a team that didn't field full 12 ships, I was like, oh, you could be having 2 point EWAR frigates here, and I didn't like any time where I didn't see people use the maximum 12. and just stuff more of those E-War frigs in
Well,
there.
frigates with the new 12-man setup are just playing a massive role. There are teams here that are just assault frigate teams with some bigger ships to sort of support the assault frigates. Like, you might not see as many interceptors, but assault frigates, E-War frigates, destroyers, interdictors. I think the small ships are really taking such a bigger role in this tournament.
Yeah, and I mean, they seem to be doing multiple things. Like either they'll be utility, E-War stuff, or simply, like we've seen something that we haven't seen in the 10-man format that's changed considerably in the 12-man format, is they essentially have two battles going on at the same time. Right. Pandemic Legion, who we just saw lose their last setup, essentially had two FCs, one large ship FC and one small ship FC, and they're just operating independently at two completely different parts of the arena.
It's like you've got your battleship wing and your fighter wing. The frigates are having like the fighter combat. They're going in there and doing all that cool stuff. And I think it adds like a parallel field of battle on top of just the big ships. And I really enjoy seeing it. It's like doubles the depth of the tournament, being able to watch that second fight.
And then we triple it when we add boots on the ground.
Yeah,
yes.
Someday we will triple it.
Yeah.
That's a good question. Could you see Dust 514 being incorporated into maybe not this next Alliance tournament, but maybe the Alliance tournament after that? So the Alliances have to not only be good at spaceships, but also be good at
The Dust
people
Alliance tournament.
shooting.
No.
What I would predict happening is that we will have the Alliance tournament in its sort of normal format. We will have a Dust tournament, and then there might be a third one where you bring it all together into one massive tournament.
The space championship.
The extra cool kids.
Yeah.
And I mean, it would be kind of fun. I kind of like it. I mean, you'd have like two teams that'll fight each other on two platforms and maybe some combined pointy thing, like we figure something out. But anyway, let's see where that goes. We have CCP Sunset with our commentators. Ravi's team, of course, just getting knocked out.
Hi, welcome back to the commentary booth. I'm here with Ravi and Kill 2.
Hello.
Hello. So, we've seen some teams bring in the same setups time and time again.
Normally we'd say that's bad, but surprise! Hey, it worked here.
How many different kind of setups can you have? I mean, the point system is really quite open.
Yeah, it's nearly infinite. There's so many different classes of ships available and so many ships within that. You can choose between teams that armor tank, shield tank, that use mostly damaged E-War, that rely on long range, that rely on speed. There's so many different combinations in a game like EVE, and the point system is what allows you to kind of figure out what fits within that. We got up on the screen there two possible ship setups, and one on the left there is a fairly typical Mimitar Rush setup, and then the one on the right is a Tengu and Curse ECM control team.
Yeah.
Okay, so Kill 2, do you have much to add?
I mean, not really. Just that, yeah, there's like a billion options. That there's room for so much variation, and we kind of see over the course of the tournament typically some strong core ideas develop. Like in this tournament, we've seen kind of the big battleships with a strong support wing and a logistics and command support. Like that's kind of an archetype, and you have rush archetypes and ECM archetypes. But within each of those, you can always fiddle with pieces. You can always change out one element for another element, and then we also see huge jumps away from the standard. And there's just so much room for creativity and kind of variation. It's really interesting, and that's actually echoes TQ really well. I think that's something that we get good examples of in the tournament, but the tournament is limited by points and by total number of ships, and on TQ you just have that blown out to, the nth degree where
You're limited by how many people you have available to log
Yeah.
on, but you still have to come up with a plan for it.
yeah, and even in small groups, it's there's so much range. I think it's one of the strongest points of EVE that you can always kind of try to be creative and figure out new combinations of things.
Yep. The most important thing when you have any setup is to have a plan, to know exactly what you're trying to do, how you're trying to win, and to know how you're going to stop different major types of other teams from winning. And some teams go in just thinking, well, this is a good ship, let's throw that in. Hey, this is also a good ship, let's throw that in.
Yeah.
They don't do as well. The best teams are the ones that have a clear plan of how they're going to win and how they're going to stop key other setups from winning.
Yeah. Something we've seen play a big role is keeping range, so using webs. Can we talk a little bit about the difference between, just webs, scrams, all the different options you can have to...
So webs and scrams are the two main ways that you'll slow down another ship. Stasis web fires just do a straight slow down of the ship. They reduce it by 60% for Tech 2 web, which goes up to 90 on these Cronoses and Vindicators we've been seeing a lot of. Scramblers turn off the micro warp drive. So they slow them down in two different ways, and they work together if you use them both to get a ship going really, really slow. Webs, you really see them for two purposes. One is to keep the other ship close to you so that you can do damage, and one is to keep them further away so that you can avoid getting damage taken to you.
Yep, and that's just extremely important across all of EVE. Again, that's true in the tournament, it's true on TQ. Range control is like the number one mechanic that determines who does well in any given engagement. All the weapon systems in EVE, all the tanking systems in EVE, like everything revolves around controlling damage flow, and range is the number one thing that kind of determines that. So,
and especially with these big ships like the Cronus's and the Vindicators, it also allows them to hit their targets because it slows down the target, allows them to track. So in a way, they act as both a range control module, position control, and as a damage module. It vastly increases your damage.
right.
Okay, well, I mean, we've seen some really good examples of that throughout the tournament, so there's obviously some more exciting matches coming up. So I'll let you guys get prepared for the next one, and we'll hand it back over to CCP Soundwave in the studio.
All right, we're back. We actually had a conversation going here about the spatial combat, and even I think we might as well just continue since it was fairly interesting. We were talking about how moving around is important. I think if I could do one thing to kind of the feel about EVE is that I'd love to have grids bigger. Like one of the things that we don't see really is kind of being able to locally warp around. Like if you had an asteroid belt here and you had a gate here and an asteroid belt here, like instead of combat being assembled in like one place, that there would actually be like local warping around and stuff like that. That would be cool.
Yeah, I think so. But when people start warping around, it means nobody's tackled, and that means no one's going to die because people are all going to be leaving the grid and leaving the fight.
Well, I mean, of course, you wouldn't be able to get out of that, but it would just mean that there would actually be physical locations on a grid where you could move around to and from. Or even have like line of sight blocking stuff. See, that would be fun.
So
That could be
I'm
cool.
face check
So you
a
could actually-
bush in EVE Online.
You could hide in an asteroid field kind of thing.
That's actually cool. I like that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it would help with a kind of a blob in that occurs, where it's just like this one massive sort of jumble of spaceships.
Yeah.
If it were to have more texture and sort of feel to it, it would be more accessible to watch, and you could easier sort of figure out what's going on in the battle. I mean, if you show up in a random fleet fight on TQ, I would guess it takes a while to figure out even what's going on, what are the teams and who's hurting, and unless you're in the sort of com chatter and you really know sort of the sort of meta game of the fleet.
Yeah.
But if there were to be more of a texture to it, you would see, okay, well, they're sort of in this phase of the fight.
It sort of used to be one of those things where you would have these massive lines of aligned sniper battleships, like firing
miss those days.
huge
Yeah.
fleets
Yeah.
and then warping out and then warping back in,
Yeah.
like big moving fleets. But now it's sort of there's fleets where it's just like, here's the anchor, that's the FC. Everybody orbit him at 5 kilometers. If there was like some weapon that sort of discouraged that sort of grouping more effectively than even bombs do currently.
Yeah.
I liked it how in the old sniping battleship days, when they would line up and the two fleets of battleships would just align towards something and start killing each other, you'd see all the wrecks behind either line of battleship. And you could kind of like, just by looking at the wrecks, you could see who's getting beat up more than the other.
And then you'd have frigates zipping through the two lines.
Yeah, and it would build more of a formation to it, even though, and I mean, every time you do a video, we make a formation because it's visual and cinematic, but the game like lacks that to it because the tactics of it don't sort of don't encourage that type of behavior. But if we had like tactics you were talking about, then we would have more of a formation and more texture. It'd be more cinematic, and it would join into something that would feel more epic than a jumble of spaceships sort of orbiting each other.
Yeah, just a ball of death that moves
A
through
ball
space.
of death.
Both your alliances would be screwed.
It looks so much cooler.
All our space collapses in 2 days.
Yes.
Didn't we
Yeah.
talk about formations? Was it a fan fest? I remember it coming up a
I
time or
don't see. There was the talk of the formations where you just like artificially move all your ships like frigates in the front. Everybody and it just does it for you, and then you get some sort of weird bonus for that. But I don't really like that. I
That's
like
awful, yeah.
the gameplay forces you to make
get,
these
like,
formations.
Yeah,
The
exactly.
blood
Well,
eagles.
like you were talking about the line of sniping battleship, like that's a good example of a formation. I think something that just sort of gimmicky and sort of aligns you, it doesn't really feel EVE. But if the natural tactics of the way the balancing would work would incentivize sort of formation creation, that would be the sort of EVE way of doing it. Although, I mean, it would be easy to say, super complicated to make happen. So.
Good on that, CC.
That's why you're here. You figure out how to make this work.
I really would like to, and just for anyone watching at home, we have about 4 minutes until Shadow Cartel fights, Exodus fights Verge of Collapse. I was looking at an outdated schedule. But yeah, that would be very, very cool. But what will you guys do? So you respectively a 9,000 man alliance and a 7,000 man alliance. You guys rely on numbers mostly, correct?
Sure, yeah. But well, we just find out what works best for us, and we do that. A lot of times, like right now, I think we're flying just ships that are easier to get people to fly, like Drakes and stuff like that. Just anchor around, shoot missiles at people. It's easy. And when you're talking about trying to wrangle hundreds of people into a single unified tactic, whatever you're working on, ease of use is hugely important.
Yeah, there is some sort of that sort of spatial combat we were talking about does exist in numbers like less than 10. So then there's this sort of like separating the other people's teams and like moving around and kiting like that. Or even here where it's 24 people, it still exists on this sort of field. But once you get to the like if it was viable at like 100 people, like a 100-man fleet based on their movement around the field could be even more cost effective against like 400 Drakes that are just this blob of Drakes throwing out missiles, then that would be amazing. But right now it's just sort of like, are you within 70k of this Drake? Oh, okay, you're dead. Where you can't really mess around like that.
That's maybe where sort of predetermined formations might help, because you could think of like a Roman army, like you're in this legion, you're in this formation, this is the phalanx, you are now clicking into roles with help with sort of new players coming into it. Like you say, you just give them Drakes because it's easy and people understand it. If you were to give them sort of battle formations and you could sort of delegate that down and you could create those, that might be a way to.
It's really hard to get maneuvering down when you're talking about this big scale. One command that I wish was in the game that we never had in the game was match speed. If you could just match speed on someone so you weren't like, you don't
No.
Why don't you like match
I
speed?
think we have too much stuff that takes playing away from players. Like the more functions we give to a single person so he can basically play the game for 400 people, I don't think that's entirely
Well, no,
good.
if you could like set, I imagine it being almost like you can scale back your speed, because right now you can modify your maximum speed in the bottom capacitor, but it's like the most clunky thing. You have to like one click. If you're off by like an eighth of an inch, you're suddenly like 500 kilometers faster, meters per second faster.
And I wasn't even talking about like matching speed on someone else. Like
right.
I wasn't talking about match speed on an FC and then the FC drives for you. I was talking about like if you were trying to stay at a certain range from your target, you'd match speed with them so you don't accidentally get too close to them and stuff like that. That was a command I was wanted.
we kind of have that command, but it's a little bit clunky and keep it range, but it doesn't really work terribly well.
Right.
Keep it range is the back and forth command.
Anyway, we are about to get into the match. It is Verge of Collapse versus Exodus. We have the team sheets up here now. Verge of Collapse have done tremendously well. They've taken out Mildly Intoxicated, one of the favorites for the Alliance tournament commentators to win this thing. Rota Capella, the tournament veterans that have done tremendously well as well. They beat Pandemic Legion before 100, Fearless, Goon Swarm. They've Dark Side as well. They've done really, really well against very, very good teams. They haven't had an easy tournament.
No, I agree.
And Exodus haven't lost yet. Wow, I hadn't
Yeah,
actually seen that.
It's another one of those teams where I didn't think that they were as good as they are, and they've sort of surprised me.
But when you look at the teams, though, they have had a bit of an easier schedule. But still, if you've won 8 matches in a row, you're obviously doing something right. Anyway, we're about to go to the match, so let's get the predictions for who's going to win this.
I am going to go with Verge of Collapse.
I don't like agreeing with Michael Bolton, but I also have to go with Verge of Collapse.
Then I'm going with Exodus.
All right, well, fair enough. I think I might also go with Verge of Collapse because they've been beating out all my favorites.